Hello everyone and welcome back to Anomalous Archive, where we post scary stories to help you sleep. Please comment where you are listening to my videos from, since I believe it would be fun for all of us to know. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for helping me reach to 50 subscribers. Let's reach 100 subscribers before the end of January. So sit back, relax and enjoy. I'm almost 30, but my life is loneliness locked within four walls. I try not to interact with anyone because I'm afraid of encountering the wrong people. I'm not talking about scammers or robbers, but about those who exist on the edge of reality. They can be terrifying right away, or they can pretend to be normal for a long time, gaining trust and proving to everyone around them that they're even more normal than you. But sooner or later, something gives them away. Their pale skin suddenly turns blue, their faces contort, their joints twist unnaturally. And these creatures are drawn to me as if they consider me one of their own. That's why I try not to make acquaintances, to keep a low profile, and to live quietly as a loner. These people seem to be tied to places where something bad has happened, a disaster, an accident, a painful death. In a big city, death is commonplace, so I encounter them everywhere, literally every day. I call them sufferers. I don't know what they are. At first, I thought they were the souls of dead people, but then I realized they are more like something that was born in the moment of dying. Sufferers are some cruel, mocking embodiment of a terrible death, a caricature of human agony. I avoid places where I've ever encountered them. I constantly have to change routes, making them longer and more inconvenient. I used to often pass through an underground passage. Not all the lights worked there, cigarette butts littered the floor, parts of the walls were crumbling, and it always smelled of urine. But this path shortened my way home. The passage was almost always empty, but from time to time, a beggar would shelter there from bad weather. He sat on a piece of cardboard, dirty, with a matted beard. He wore a tattered plaid sweater and two jackets with broken zippers. On his head was a blue knit hat with ties and a funny pom-pom, under which greasy strands of unwashed hair stuck out. This homeless man never missed a chance to ask for help. He always said, "Got a smoke? Or any spare change?" I'm as poor as a church mouse myself, so the only difference between me and him was that I hadn't yet been evicted from my apartment for unpaid utility bills. I had nothing to share with that beggar. I think to help others, you first need to help yourself, and I wasn't very good at that either. One late autumn evening, I was passing through the passage and noticed that this time the beggar wasn't sitting but lying curled up on his cardboard. He was shivering from coughing, stopping briefly, only to start again, choking on saliva and phlegm. Although I always considered myself the last person in the world to help someone, I do have a heart. So, I took off my old wool scarf and handed it to the beggar. "Thanks," he rasped, lifting himself slightly and tying it tightly around his neck. That night was freezing. Even at home, wrapped in a blanket, I could feel the cold seeping into my skin. And in the morning, I had to go out again in hopes of finding some money or at least food. My whole life has been about scraping by with odd jobs. I couldn't stay at a stable job without being labeled crazy. I'd tried before, but it always ended the same way. I'd make friendly connections with colleagues, only to discover that some of them didn't exist. Soon enough, real people started treating me like a weirdo who talked to himself while staring at walls. Clients were scared of me, coworkers avoided me. Wherever I was, everything always went wrong. Then I decided I didn't want to face the disappointment of another firing and chose to be my own boss. I have no education, university also required social interaction. So, I started doing odd jobs wherever I could, barely making ends meet. That day, I desperately needed money and was ready to jump at any opportunity. I quickly left my street, heading toward the city center. Overnight, the city had been dusted with hard, grainy snow that resembled coarse salt. The wind pierced through my hat, and I pulled my jacket collar higher, shielding my neck. I followed my usual route toward the underground passage. Descending the stairs, I saw that beggar again. He was lying on the floor in a pool of his frozen urine. His lips and eyelashes were covered in frost, and his hands tightly clutched his shoulders. The scarf I had given him hadn't saved him from that freezing night. It was still early morning. I walked past, knowing others would find the body soon enough. They knew better than me what to do in such situations. In a big city, the death of one person means nothing. It's like a fallen hair that gets combed out and thrown away. No one notices its absence. I continued using that passage for a long time. Every day, I passed by the spot where the beggar had died. I wanted to believe his death was peaceful, not painful. Maybe he just fell asleep and didn't wake up. But one evening, as I descended, I saw the silhouette of a person at the other end of the tunnel. He was kneeling, his head bowed. Suspecting nothing, I walked toward him, thinking it was just another poor soul seeking shelter from the wind. But suddenly, he began to rise, his joints cracking like breaking ice. I stopped, immediately realizing what he was. The man turned his bearded face toward me and coughed. The sound was so loud that the walls trembled, and bits of tile fell. The coughing grew louder each time. The sound rang in my ears. Teeth flew out of the frozen man's mouth, and he ran toward me, his frozen eyes staring. Blood sprayed from his black throat. The coughing shook the tunnel. I turned and fled, never to descend into that passage again. That route was now tainted by the sufferer. I had to find another way home. And this keeps happening to me. These cursed sufferers have ruined my entire life. I was only 7 years old when I first encountered one of these creatures. As a child, I made friends easily, but they never grew into lasting friendships. So sometimes, I played alone. I wandered the city outskirts, picking up sticks and stones, inventing solo games. One day, near a forest, I met a boy who insisted on being my friend. He seemed like any other child, just a kid with short hair, wearing a bright cartoon t-shirt and sports shorts. Freckles dotted his nose, and his eyes were light blue. "What's your name?" the boy asked. "Tolia," I replied. "I'm Henry," he said, extending his hand in friendship. His palm was warm. We met several times without planning, always near that same forest, and walked together. Henry turned out to be an interesting guy, though a bit odd. Out of nowhere, he'd suggest discussing grim topics. "Tolia, what do you think if someone dies in a cemetery? Is that funny?" he once asked, looking at me intently. "No, it's not funny. Death isn't something cheerful," I replied. "But I think it's funny," Henry said with a wide grin. "Why?" I didn't understand. "Well, he died at the cemetery, right? But then they take him away to the morgue, dress him, put him in a coffin, and bring him back to the cemetery. What's the point? They could have just buried him right there and saved time," explained my friend. "Yeah, I guess you're right," I hastily agreed, just wanting to close this morbid topic. At the time, I didn't think about such things because I hadn't really encountered death. Only once did my mom tell me that our elderly upstairs neighbor had passed away. She explained that life isn't eternal, people grow old and then fall asleep forever. But cemeteries, coffins, dressing the dead, I didn't know anything about that. It all passed by my carefree childhood world. But Henry seemed to be deeply interested in the topic. Sometimes I began to notice his head twitching occasionally. Just from time to time, he'd shake it as if it were dangling on a spring. It looked wild, but I tried not to pay attention, thinking it was impolite to ask about such things. One day, we were sitting on a rickety wooden bridge over a small stream, tossing pebbles into the water to scare off minnows and tadpoles. "Where do you live?" I asked. "Not far, just past that forest," Henry replied, waving his hand toward the dense trees. "Do you have your own room at home?" I asked, counting how many stones I had left in my pocket. "Of course, it's a big room." "Why do you ask?" "Want to visit?" my friend asked. "I can invite you, but only if you go with your eyes closed." "Why is that?" I was surprised. "So you don't remember the way," Henry replied, without explaining the reasoning behind the secrecy. For some reason, I thought it would be a fun game. I promised not to open my eyes and kept my word. Squinting tightly, I covered my eyelids with my palms, and Henry guided me, occasionally holding my shoulder. We walked along one of the forest paths. I couldn't see anything, but I heard the light wind swaying the tree branches, birds singing, and insects buzzing. I heard my friend's voice and caught the sound of his footsteps behind me. If he fell silent, I felt uncomfortably alone, as if I were lost in the thicket. "Henry, are you still there?" I asked nervously yet again. "Yes, I'm here." "Watch out, there's a bump ahead," the boy warned, and I carefully moved my feet. This went on for a long time, and I started to tire of the game. I felt my feet aching, my eyelids hurting from tension, and my stomach grumbling, demanding lunch. "We're here," Henry finally said. "But don't open your eyes yet." I stopped. He walked ahead and noisily tugged at something metal. Hinges creaked, it sounded like a gate or an old door. Henry took my shoulder again. "Come in, but walk slowly. There's a staircase ahead." I felt myself enter a dark, cold space. No more daylight filtered through my eyelids, and I smelled dampness. Carefully, I descended the small steps, following my friend. Sand crunched underfoot. "Quiet, walk slowly, or you'll fall and break your neck," Henry said, repeating the phrase again directly into my ear. "You'll fall and break your neck." His voice echoed off the walls. It sounded so eerie that I immediately lost all trust in my friend. I started to wonder, was it wise to trust a boy I barely knew? And where had he brought me? What kind of house required going downstairs? The steps ended. I stepped onto a solid stone floor, still keeping my eyes shut. I could hear a rhythmic ticking noise in the room. "Here's my room," Henry said, standing behind me. I opened my eyes and saw horror. A faint light from the top of the stairs revealed a terrifying scene. There were only brick walls, no doors or windows. On the floor lay two rotten, broken coffins with human bones sticking out. The rhythmic sound wasn't a clock at all, it was water dripping through the stone ceiling, forming a puddle in the corner. I cautiously looked around. Henry stood in the stairwell, his head twitching violently in all directions, right, left, forward, and back. He was smiling, clearly delighted with his joke. I screamed, and my cry echoed. The boy laughed, his head jerking like an evil clown on a spring suddenly popping out of a box. I rushed toward the passage, knocked him off his feet, and dashed up the stairs. "You'll break your neck," he shouted from the dimness below. It turned out the deceiver had gained my trust, pretended to be a friend, and lured me to a cemetery, forcing me to descend underground. Since then, they clung to me like annoying flies, tormenting me day and night. They robbed me of normal existence and turned my life into a nightmare. I never dreamed of anything great. I just wanted to live like everyone else, study, work, have friends, and be happy. But all of that became impossible. The tormentors followed me everywhere. They ruined all my beginnings, undermined me in front of my bosses, played tricks on the women I tried to date, and made me look like a fool in front of colleagues. Everything I touched turned into a circus and a nightmare. Over time, I gave up trying to reclaim a normal life. I started earning money doing jobs that didn't require interaction with people, posting flyers on the streets, stuffing mailboxes with ads. The work was tedious, but better than nothing. One day, I entered an apartment building with a stack of flyers and saw a woman in a purple housecoat and slippers. Her blonde hair was clipped back with a claw clip, exposing slightly protruding ears with gold earrings. She stood by her apartment door, pale and frightened. "Young man, don't you think it smells like gas?" she asked anxiously. "I don't think so," I replied, sniffing the air. She stepped closer, standing directly in front of me, and looked into my eyes. "Don't you smell it?" "I'm telling you, it smells like gas." The woman's mouth stretched wide in a scream. Her face gradually took on the shade of her bathrobe, her eyes widened, she began to tremble, and foam appeared on her lips. A wind rose from her scream. I dropped the flyers, and they scattered across the landing and the stairs. I was already running away, barely glancing back. That woman stomped on the tiles with the heavy soles of her slippers and shouted, "Breathe. There's nowhere to breathe." This is how the afflicted always burst into my everyday life, brightly and unexpectedly. I didn't even want to leave my home. Only there, alone with myself, did I feel peace and safety. God forbid I ever lose my last refuge and end up among them in the streets. I wouldn't survive this eternal madness. Right now, my apartment is a place to retreat from nightmares, a place where everything is calm and serene, where I can gather moral strength for a new, unpredictable day. I wanted to learn how to earn money online so I would never have to leave my apartment, but it didn't work out. I lacked the necessary skills, so I had to go back to handing out flyers and posting ads. My last miserable paycheck went to pay off my electricity debt. I knew that if I didn't pay now, they'd cut off my power. All I had left in my pocket was a couple of dollars, enough for a bag of rice and a can of preserves. That would get me through a couple more days. I often ate the cheapest food to save money, and damned rice wouldn't go down my throat anymore, but I didn't really have a choice. On my way home, I noticed a small eatery with a bright sign reading grilled shawarma. I pulled $5 out of my pocket and looked at it, realizing how miserable my life was. I had to make a choice, eat shawarma once and go hungry or choke down grain for 2 days. Probably not everyone has to make such decisions. Not everyone understands what extreme poverty is when you don't know if you'll be able to buy soap this week or have to keep washing with just water. I decided to treat myself to a little celebration with my last money. I wanted to feel a bit happier, so I headed to the diner. Inside, 3 people were sitting at tables. A girl in an apron, about 25 years old, stood behind the counter. "What'll it be?" the worker asked, wiping her hands on a towel. "One classic shawarma, please," I said, letting go of my paranoia. "To go or here?" she clarified. I hesitated. It was still a long way home, and my stomach was already growling. "Here." "And tea, please, with sugar," I finally answered, feeling how the hope for a small pleasure warmed my soul. "That'll be $6, the girl said, taking out a box of tea. "What if without sugar?" I asked hesitantly, lowering my eyes. "I only have $5. "Fine," the worker clicked her tongue. "Just give me your $5 already." While waiting for my order, I chose the furthest table and sat down, keeping away from everyone. I nervously tapped my foot, afraid someone would disturb me and not let me eat in peace. How exhausting this life was, always expecting something to go wrong. My intuition didn't fail me. From the neighboring table, a short, stout man got up and approached me. I looked up, hoping he'd just ask for napkins and leave. But no! The man stood silently. His face suddenly turned red, as if scalded with boiling water. His skin blistered, then wrinkled and began peeling off, exposing raw flesh. I jumped up, ready to run. But suddenly, the diner worker appeared nearby. She shoved the afflicted man in the side and said, "Hey, lard bucket. Get out of here." To my surprise, he obeyed. He glanced at the girl in confusion, lowered his head, and walked toward the exit, dripping molten skin onto his shoes. By then, all the other customers had left. Only I and the diner worker remained. "Did you see what happened to him?" I asked, stunned. "Yep, boiled hard," the girl replied, placing a plastic plate with shawarma and a cup of tea on my table. I kept bombarding her with questions. "Does he come here often?" "Every day," she smirked. "Aren't you afraid?" "What's he gonna do to me?" She answered, wiping a nearby table. "Do you see others like him too?" I persisted. "Of course," the girl replied as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. I couldn't believe I'd met someone who also saw the afflicted and wasn't afraid of them. Honestly, I never dared to test how dangerous they were, so I simply ran away. I opened my mouth to ask another question, but the girl tapped her wrist. "Sorry, I've got work to do," she said, turning away and heading back behind the counter. "Enjoy your meal." "Thanks," I replied. I hadn't felt this calm outside my home in a long time. I ate the shawarma, sipping the sweet tea, glancing at the girl, and wondering how she managed to stay so lighthearted amidst this curse. As I left, she called after me. "Come by again sometime." "Yeah, thanks for the sugar and everything," I replied as I walked out of the diner. And I had always dreamed of meeting someone like me, someone who would understand my fears and pains. So now, as soon as I managed to scrape together an extra couple of hundred, I immediately rushed to that eatery. Lily, that's what was written on the badge hanging on her work apron. This girl always greeted me with a friendly smile. Sometimes, the same fat guy would sit in the diner. He would look at me, then at Lily. His face twitched angrily, and sometimes bubbles would swell and burst on his cheeks and nose. But he no longer approached or bothered me. Coming in one more time, I emptied all the coins from my pockets and said, "Shawarma and cheese lavash." "And tea?" "No tea." "All right, coming right up," the girl said, realizing I didn't have enough. I still couldn't bring myself to ask her personal questions about her fates. Shyness held me back, but I still wanted to get to know her better. I hoped maybe she would teach me how to live with this. I sat at the table and watched the customers. That evening, there were 3 of them, including the big guy. A young man couldn't take his eyes off his phone screen, and a swarthy man greedily devoured his hot dog. No one paid attention to the man at the neighboring table, whose face was swelling with bubbles. I also decided not to look at him so as not to ruin my appetite. And when I finished the last bite and drank my tea, I returned to the girl at the counter, hoping to get at least a bit of her attention. "Do you know what happened here?" I asked. "What do you mean?" She replied, raising an eyebrow. "Well, these," I cautiously nodded toward the big guy. "They appear where something happened." "That?" she said and pointed a finger at the ceiling. A hot water pipe burst, and the door jammed from the heat. So we all boiled alive in the scalding water. Her words made my ears ring, but I still hoped the girl had simply misspoken. "Sorry, did you say we all?" "We all," the diner worker loudly repeated. And at that moment, the masks were dropped. Her skin reddened, swelled, and peeled off. Wet clumps of hair fell from her head. The diner filled with screams. In unison, everyone there started howling, the fat man, the guy with the phone, and the swarthy man. They suddenly turned into red chunks of flesh. Their skin hung in tatters, thick steam rising from their bodies. They flailed their arms, choking on their own cries. The girl I had found so charming turned out to be just like them. Panicked, I rushed to the door, slammed my shoulder against it until the joint ached, but couldn't open it. I banged my knees, pounded with my fists, and rammed with my shoulder again, while the sufferer screamed without pause all the while. Finally, the door opened. I burst onto the street and ran, looking back only once. Behind me were just the dark, dusty windows of the diner, and above them hung an almost faded sign, Shawarma Grill. Those damned sufferers had mocked me again. And, probably, they would keep doing it until the end of my worthless life.